I want you to think back to the last time you really had to think hard about something, looking for an answer that wasn't immediately there, feeling that specific kind of resistance that real thinking sometimes has. When was that exactly? A week ago? A month ago? And how long did it take before you reached for something to help you? In 2022, something changed. Not loudly, not with a big announcement, but quietly, because suddenly a tool existed that had an answer to almost every question. Formulated, structured, and ready within seconds. And ever since that moment, cognitive scientists, educators, and neuroscientists around the world have been asking the same uncomfortable question. If thinking no longer costs any effort, are we still practicing it? Let's take a step back first, because AI is not a new idea at all. It's a very old one that suddenly became very fast. In 1950, the British mathematician Alan Turing posed a question that would occupy science for decades. Can machines think? His Turing test, can a machine hold a conversation that is indistinguishable from a human one, became the founding thought of an entire discipline. But the idea was decades ahead of the technology that could actually realize it. Over the following decades, the first programs emerged that played chess, recognized patterns, and solved simple tasks. But computing power was limited, available data was limited, and so was everything that was possible. What changed was not the idea itself, it was the resources available to pursue it. During the 2000s and 10s, three things exploded simultaneously. Specialized chips that could deliver computing power at a previously unimaginable scale, the sheer volume of training data made available by the internet, and new model architectures. In particular, the so-called transformer models, introduced by Google researchers in 2017, laid the foundation for everything that followed. And then, on November 30th, 2022, OpenAI released a tool called ChatGPT. Within 5 days, it had 1 million users. Within 2 months, it had 100 million active users per month. To put that in perspective, Netflix needed 3.5 years to reach that number. Instagram took 2 years and 6 months. TikTok took 9 months. ChatGPT did it in 8 weeks, and in doing so became the fastest growing consumer product in the history of technology. The reason it spread so fast is actually simpler than most people expect. ChatGPT was the first AI system that didn't feel like a tool, it felt like a conversation. No code required, no commands to learn. You simply asked a question in plain English and received a complete, well-formulated answer within seconds. The reaction was immediate, and it was global. Microsoft invested over $13 billion in OpenAI. Google launched Gemini to compete. Meta accelerated its own AI projects. Anthropic, founded by former OpenAI researchers, released Claude. NVIDIA, the chip manufacturer whose processors power all of these systems, grew its market value to over $2 trillion in less than 2 years. The generative AI market is projected by analysts to grow to over $1.3 trillion by 2030. This is not a technology trend. This is a structural shift in the global economy. But speed has always come with a price, and that price usually only shows itself later. Before we get there, let's be honest about what AI actually achieves, because it genuinely deserves that honesty. A 2023 study from Stanford University and MIT examined software developers working with AI assistants and found that productivity increased by an average of 55%. Not marginally, not by 10%, but by more than half. The Boston Consulting Group tested AI support with management consultants and found that those using AI tools completed tasks 25% faster, produced 40% more output, and had their work rated as significantly higher quality by independent evaluators. In medicine, AI now analyzes X-rays and tissue samples with an accuracy that, in certain areas, is comparable to that of experienced specialists. DeepMind solved a problem in 2020 with its program AlphaFold that biology had been working on for 50 years, predicting the three-dimensional structure of proteins. Within a single year, the system had calculated the structures of over 200 million proteins, which is more than all the scientists in the world had collectively determined throughout the entire history of research. That is not hype. That is real, and it would be dishonest to gloss over it. But now comes the question that inevitably follows from all of this. When answers are instantly available, do people stop searching for them? Think about yourself for a moment. Do you remember how you researched a difficult question 10 years ago? You opened a search engine, got 10 links, opened 3 of them, compared the information, weighed which sources you trusted, and formed your own opinion. That was not a perfect process, but it was a thinking process, one that required you to engage actively with the information rather than simply receive it. Today, most people type the same question into an AI system and receive a single, finished, perfectly formulated answer. No links, no comparison, no contradictions to navigate, just the answer. And that feels good. It feels efficient, it feels correct, but is it? Researchers at Harvard University published a study in 2024 examining how regular AI use affects critical thinking. Their finding was striking. Participants who frequently adopted AI answers without their own reflection showed measurably reduced ability in follow-up tests to solve the same kinds of problems independently, even when the original AI answers had been correct. The brain only trains what it actually does. Someone who no longer searches stops training the skill of searching. Someone who no longer weighs options stops training the skill of judgment. And then there is the problem the industry simply calls hallucination. AI systems make things up. Not rarely, not intentionally, but regularly. They generate citations that don't exist, reference studies that were never published, and describe events with confidently phrased details that are simply wrong. They do all of this with exactly the same calm, precise language they use when everything they say is accurate. A lawyer in New York filed a court brief in 2023 containing several case citations that ChatGPT had generated. None of those cases existed. The lawyer had not verified the answers, and the court noticed. That was not an isolated incident, and the lawyer was not careless or unintelligent. He was simply someone who trusted a convincingly articulate tool without asking questions. Does that sound familiar at all? Now here's the objection that many people raise at this point, and it is a fair one. When calculators became common in schools during the 1970s, many educators said this was the end of mathematical thinking, that children would never learn to calculate again, and that an entire generation was being made dependent on a machine. What actually happened was something different. Instruction shifted. Instead of spending hours on manual calculations, schools began teaching higher mathematical concepts earlier: statistics, modeling, problem formulation. The machine took over the computation, and humans focused on the thinking behind it. When search engines became widely accessible in the early 2000s, the concern was that no one would memorize anything anymore, and that human memory would atrophy. What actually happened was more complex. Memory changed rather than disappeared. People retained fewer specific facts, but became better at knowing where to find information and how to evaluate it. A new form of information literacy emerged. Humanity has made this kind of adaptation over and over again, with writing, with the printing press, with the telephone, with the computer. So is AI simply another step in that same sequence? Just another level of adaptation that we have always managed to make? Maybe, but there is one difference that matters enormously. Every tool that came before either stored, transported, or calculated something. The printing press stored knowledge, the telephone transported speech, the calculator performed arithmetic. AI generates thoughts. That is not an exaggeration. When you ask an AI system to develop an argument, justify a decision, or analyze a problem, it produces something that looks like a thinking process and reads like a thinking process. No tool before it has ever done that. And that is precisely why the question of how we use AI may be the most important question of the next decade. Because there are two fundamentally different ways to use an AI system. The first is to ask a question, receive an answer, and adopt it as your own. The second is to ask a question, receive an answer, verify it, reflect on it, push back on it, develop it further, and use the AI as a starting point rather than an end point. The difference between these two approaches is not technical, it is human. Studies consistently show that the most effective AI users are not people who trust AI blindly, but people who combine critical thinking with AI speed. People who know when they can follow the machine and when they need to question it. What does that actually look like in practice? Doctors at Massachusetts General Hospital use AI to analyze medical imaging. The AI flags abnormalities. The doctor decides. This combination has led to a measurable reduction in misdiagnoses in clinical tests, not because the AI was smarter than the doctor, but because it notices things that a human eye might miss after reviewing the 12th scan of the day. The doctor sees what the model cannot understand, the human being behind the image. Pilot programs across American schools show that personalized AI tutors can support students with learning difficulties more effectively than traditional one-size-fits-all approaches. Not because an algorithm replaces a teacher, but because an algorithm is infinitely patient. It can explain the same concept 20 times in 20 different ways until one of them finally works. Climate scientists use AI to run simulations at a level of detail that would simply be impossible manually. Material scientists are discovering new compounds for batteries and semiconductors in a fraction of the time that traditional laboratory work would require. These are not hypothetical future scenarios. They are happening right now. But they are happening alongside something else that is equally real. Millions of students around the world are submitting work that AI wrote, and in doing so, they are not learning to write themselves, not because they are lazy, but because the tool exists and no one has clearly defined the rules of engagement. Millions of professionals are sharing AI-generated information every day without verifying whether it is accurate, not out of bad intent, but because it is fast and it feels right. The core problem is not the technology, it is the habit. So let me ask you directly, you are probably already using AI, perhaps daily, perhaps for things you would previously have worked through yourself. When did you last genuinely question an AI answer rather than simply accept it? Are you using AI as a tool that extends your own thinking or as a shortcut that replaces it? That difference sounds small, but it is not. Intelligence is not a fixed attribute, it is a skill, and like every skill, it requires practice. It atrophies when it goes unused, and it grows when it is challenged. AI can be that challenge, or AI can remove that challenge entirely. Which one it becomes does not depend on the technology. Artificial intelligence has democratized access to knowledge like no tool before it. It has lowered barriers to productivity, enabled scientific breakthroughs, and made capabilities accessible that previously required expensive training or years of experience. That is true, and it is significant. And at the same time, every technology that makes thinking faster carries the risk of making thinking feel less necessary. That was true of the calculator, the GPS, and the smartphone. It is true of AI as well, only at a larger scale and with a deeper reach into what we have always considered distinctly human: the ability to argue, to judge, and to doubt. The question is not whether AI is good or bad. The question is whether you will use AI to think better or to think less. And the answer to that is something you are writing right now, every single day, with every decision about whether to simply accept an answer or to actually question it. Technology has never asked us how we want to use it. That has always been our responsibility, now more than ever.